never actually even visited Italy, right? Then a lawless shepherd of the west will follow him of uglier deeds, well chosen for covering him and me when both are pressed under his skull. He'll be a second Jason, and as the first, so Maccabees recounts, was treated softly by his monarch. This one will get soft treatment from the king of France. In 2 Maccabees 4:7-8, that's one of the apocryphal texts the Catholics knew well. We have this story about a guy named Jason who negotiates with the current king so that he can come into Palestine and try and turn the Jews increasingly more away from their Jewish faith. Notice then Dante is making all kinds of interesting references because, of course, the minute you hear Jason, you're thinking Jason the Argonauts of the earlier Bulgarian. We're not at all there, right? In my reply, Dante, I don't know if I erred with too much boldness. Dante the poet knows he's walking a very, very fine line. Go back to our comments on Chaucer's The Wife of Bath. Right before, you'll remember, she says, hey, don't be offended at my views. They're only offered to amuse. That notion that, hey, I know I'm about to trend. Dante's about to do some serious reformist preaching, and he just wants to let his Catholic audience know, I hope I don't cross the line too much. He says it this way, but with too much boldness in my vehemence. And this is what he says back to the Pope. And of course, speaking to all religious, we could say for all time. Pray, tell me, how much treasure did our Lord ask of St. Peter before he put the keys into his keeping? Matthew 16:18-19, right? The keys of the kingdom of heaven. Surely he required nothing but follow me. Matthew 4:19, right? Neither did those with Peter or Peter himself take silver or gold from Matthias, who was chosen for that place lost by the guilty soul. After Judas Iscariot hangs himself for the portrayal of Christ, they have to have one more, and we're told in the story of Acts 1:24-26 that a new one was told, and Matthias is the one that comes. But notice, no money was exchanged. By the way, do note, this one about lost by the guilty soul is going to be Judas Iscariot, who will be chewed in the center mouth of Satan at the very end of Inferno here when we get to Canto 34. Stay where you're held, Dante the Pilgrim now will say, for these are your deserved punishments. Guard well the ill-earned gains that made you bold in opposing Charles. This is a reference now to the king of Charles, the king of Sicily and Naples, who declined to marry Nicholas's niece for obviously nepotistic reasons, right? Accept that reverence for the great keys you held in the happy life forbids my speech would be still more intense. In other words, if I didn't have such respect for the papacy, I would really lay into you. Well, he's about to lay into him, so we can't imagine what Dante the poet would say that he won't already have said to finish Canto 19. For avarice like yours distributes grief afflicting the world by trampling on the good and raising the wicked. This is the argument of Dante. Listen carefully. The deeper you go into hell, the reason the sins are the sins that they are, and the punishments more extreme, is because with every single circle, bullshit, whatever, as we go down, the act of sin affects greater and greater numbers of people. Notice what he says. Your actions, and obviously now he's not just speaking to Nicholas, right? He's talking to all would-be religious, of course all popes. Your actions, he says, have affected the world. Luther, by the way, said the same thing. By trampling on the good and raising the wicked. Language from the minor prophets. Shepherds like yourself, the evangelist intended. Revelation 17:1-4. This is the whore of Babylon lines. The evangelist, St. John, the evangelist intended when he said that she who sits upon the waters has seen by him in fornication with kings. She, the church, had 7 heads from birth, that's the 7 sacraments, and from 10 horns, that's the 10 commandments, had drawn her strength, so long as virtue pleased her spouse. In other words, there was a time when the church was far more pure than it is now. So notice, we have now the joining of Dante the political writer with his critique of Florence, with Dante the theologian, his critique of the church, coming now together. He's saying the exact same thing. And what is it that took both down? Greed, avarice, right? You made a god of gold and silver, wherein is it you differ from the idolatrous, save that you worship 100, they but one. The only difference between the idolater and you, the Pope, or the religious, is that they only have one God. You have many, 100. That is to say, your desire for more and more money. And then instead of, oh, it's but it's the same thing. Constantine. Now, Constantine, of course, moved the church to Byzantium, and after Dante's death, this donation of Constantine in the 8th century was understood to be a forgery. But here we're having this reference to it. Oh, Constantine, what measure of wickedness stems from that mother, not your conversion, I mean. Rather, the dowry that the first rich father accepted from you, Pope Sylvester I. And while the poet, Dante, is ready to finish. And while I sang this strain, notice singing is preaching for Dante. And while I sang this strain, whether he felt the bite of conscience or anger, he kicked out hard with both his feet. Indeed, I think my guide approved with a look of pleasure, listening to the sound of true words said. Of course, Virgil would approve of this, even though Virgil a pagan, because Virgil's Aeneas is, of course, the great hero of pietas. We said that in our lecture on the Aeneid, didn't we? That is to say, piety, proper behavior. In other words, what Dante is saying to all religious is, you're not as pious as you should be, and for that, shame on you. Whoa! Dante the humanist, Dante the early Renaissance man, is very Promethean here, isn't he? That is to say, he's going to challenge the status quo. For this, we have to give Dante some props. This took some serious courage for him to do this kind of thing. Question, would he have probably written this poem if he had never been exiled from Florence? Probably not. Certainly not in the way that he's doing it here. Everything is driven by his loathing of Boniface VIII and what he feels was a political act, right? Now to finish the Canto 19. And then he, Virgil, lifted me in his arms again. Notice, again, the times Virgil touches Dante is fascinating. And then he lifted me in his arms again, my weight full on his chest. And when he climbed the same path he had taken down. Nor did he tire while holding me embraced, but carried me to the summit of the span from the 4th dyke to the 5th. Then gently released his burden, gently, because the passage was hard, so steep and rocky that goats might be hard-pressed. And there, before me, another valley appeared. Now again, I can't emphasize this enough. One more time, put it in your notes. This is a poem set in 1300. Dante dies 1320, right? 1321. Chaucer dies in 1400. At the conclusion of his life, he's obviously created that great Canterbury Tales, which is more than just a few short stories. Go back and look at those lectures again that we've given. He is, Chaucer, seriously attacking what he sees as the hypocrisy of the church, following, of course, in the tradition of Dante. And then, of course, there it is, October the 31st, 1517, Luther will nail his 95 Theses up on that church door in Wittenberg, and everything from that point on is going in a certain direction. Of course, think about it. 1517, Wittenberg and Luther. 1600, Dante will have influenced another great writer. The next writer we're going to see, Shakespeare. And his Hamlet, you'll remember, the young man, wants to go back to school at the beginning of the play. Go back to school. Not where Laertes is going, Paris. That's like the new version of Florence, the new version of Rome. It's a corrupt city, Paris. No. Young Hamlet wants to go where to school? Wittenberg. We'll get there. All right, let's work now levels quickly, 2 and 3. At 2A, well, clearly, corrupt religions hurt God's work. That is clearly a message of Dante's poem, right? Another interesting message here, and it's assumed in this critique, is that you can love the church and still critique it harshly, right? That is to say, we don't have any kind of blind fanatical faith here. Dante is very much a critiquer of the church he loves. Finally, of course, simony has hurt lots more people than just a single person, which is why the punishment here is so harsh. Considering, again, the courage that it takes Dante to write these lines, it is quite amazing. Well, to be the symbolism, well, the broken baptismal font is an interesting symbol of the defense and as well an accusation at the same time. Dante will defend himself, I wasn't being irreverent, so don't qualify me as irreverent, and an accusation. In some ways, of course, the irony here is, in the broken baptismal fonts, we see broken popes as well, and maybe a broken church that needs to be fixed. We're going to see a lot of brokenness in Inferno. The bridges will start to break down, etc., etc. And as we move forward into Purgatorio and Paradiso, we'll come back to some of this kind of critique as well. Don't worry, this is just the setup. In the second canticle and in the final canticle, we're going to hear more and more of this kind of thing. Dante as poet, well, very, very Promethean, no question about it. He is very much challenging the status quo. Dante as politician, well, the church became corrupt because of money, just like Florence became corrupt because of money. The philosopher Dante, of course, will make this argument. You can still believe in an institution, even though it's broken, and it has these broken popes or these broken religions. At 3a, think about this for a moment, and this may be a stretch for some of you at first, but remember our learning theory is to connect in meaningful ways, old to new. Do you remember in Iliad 5, Diomedes will fight against the gods and actually wounds Aphrodite and Ares? Do you remember this? He goes after Ares. In the same way, I think, Dante here is attacking, no question, God, and he survives, right? He gets on through it. Chaucer's attack on church hypocrisy, we've already mentioned, of course, in that parson, the good parson, right? You can love the church and hate the hypocrisy, Dante will argue, right? Remember what the partner says, for though I am a wholly vicious man, don't think I can't tell moral tales, I can. And then remember, we made that distinction of whether you think you can separate message from messenger, or are they in fact symbiotic. Go back and look at that lecture again. Luther, of course, we've mentioned as well. He wanted to remain Catholic and to reform it. He was a devout Augustinian monk, and of course it's powerful that he was Augustinian given the influence of St. Augustine on Dante. What is your favorite text about challenging an authority institution? I mean, obviously the Declaration of Independence comes to mind for us, right? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. The notion of the Declaration of Independence is simple. First you set up what it should be, and then you say, England hasn't done what it should do, and therefore it is our right, it is our duty, right, to throw off said government. At 3b, what was a time you knew this was coming, right? What was a time you challenged authority or an authority institution and, you know, you showed courage? Maybe you failed, maybe you didn't. How about this question at 3b? Do you think you can love the church or the country or whatever institution you want to qualify here and hate or dislike or wish to reform what's inside, the bad eggs, if you will? Can you do that? And how is it that so often reformers end up being marginalized or hurt or whatever, killed, Dante exiled? Or, if you don't like the institution, do you leave it to try to create something else? How do you reform a broken institution? Dante, of course, may be very much interested in asking that question. What he does is write a poem that becomes one of the greatest poems ever written. Do you think, though, and we asked this question about our study of Chaucer, right? Do you think, though, that Dante helped or hurt belief in the church? You'll remember that we said this about our study of Chaucer's partner, that it's very possible, you remember the partner calls them yokels. Those people who don't really think very much about it, they just assume, they accept, I have faith, I believe in the church. And then all of a sudden you get this kind of expose in Chaucer's partner, where he says what he says, and we said, is it possible that some people could lose their faith in the church by virtue of losing their faith in a single individual? We as humans have a tendency to do that. Do you think that Dante has gone too far here by putting popes in hell? Because it's very possible that all of a sudden a certain kind of skepticism begins to come. I'll leave that one to you. One last comment here. You'll remember this from our study of Chaucer. That you'll remember in the Scarlet Letter, we've got Dimmesdale, who is the one responsible for why the young lady at the beginning of the novel is standing on the scaffolding with an A for adultery on her chest holding an infant. And that priest will say, Dimmesdale, tell us who the father was, and she won't do it. Dimmesdale will refuse to admit throughout the novel that he is in fact the father who slept with the young girl. Why? Because Dimmesdale is the preacher of the town, and his argument is an interesting one. I know my soul is going to hell, but I will not make confession in front of everyone and thereby potentially jeopardize the faith of those in the church. Hawthorne, of course, at the end of the novel says, be true, be true, be true. In other words, Dimmesdale made a mistake. But what are your thoughts on this? Do you think that we hurt the belief ability and the rise of skepticism actually begins to happen when Dante puts popes in hell? Hey, Boniface, is that you? Ouch. Well, now that's Canto 19. We're on to Canto 20 and Vulgia 4. After jacking on the church, he's going to jack on fortune tellers, which is going to be really, really interesting, right? Because Dante is playing around with prophecy. Virgil, of course, in his poem, has Sibyl that will help out Aeneas. So this notion of Anchises telling, of course, the future as well. We're going to have to debate that one. I hope you're enjoying this discussion as much as am I. Thank you.